Welcome back to PJ Takes 5. Today is Tuesday, August 5th, and the Cleveland Browns have added yet another quarterback to their roster. But we start today in Dallas, where the Micah Parsons situation has seemingly boiled over. On Friday, August 1st, Parsons went to Twitter X and officially requested a trade, saying, quote, "I no longer want to play for the Dallas Cowboys." Definitely kind of the boiling over point between the Micah Parsons-Dallas Cowboys relationship. Going back to right before training camp, actually on the eve of when the Dallas Cowboys started practices, Jerry Jones spoke to media and basically antagonized Parsons, as well as his teammates Trayvon Diggs, Terrence Steele, and Dak Prescott, who all got contracts in recent years. But basically said that just because you sign a player to money, guaranteed money, there's no guarantee that that player ends up actually playing for you all 17 games into the postseason, what have you. Jones basically said that Parsons missed 6 games last year, so you're kind of questioning if you're going to get a full season out of him. He actually only ended up missing 4 games, but still one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Definitely an odd move to take a shot at him as the owner. And then Jones has also been kind of caught up in the middle of these bad negotiation tactics and practices, kind of cornering players without the representation to try to get a deal done, secrecy behind the scenes. Definitely not the way to do business. One of those things where you talk about why the NFLPA is so important. With better leadership in the NFLPA, would somebody be able to step up to Jerry Jones and stop this before it gained more momentum, potentially? But this seems to be kind of a mess that Jerry Jones has created, and one that he relishes in the moment a little bit. You know, football hasn't really been kicked off yet, and the Dallas Cowboys are still in the middle of the conversation nationally, so definitely out of his playbook. But it kind of leads the question to be asked, will Micah Parsons be a Dallas Cowboy this year and beyond? He's currently entering the last year of his deal, just looking for that extension. Could have happened a while ago, and they probably wouldn't have had to surpass that $41 million number set by Myles Garrett and TJ Watt earlier this offseason. I think he probably will end up being a Cowboy this fall. I know Jerry has come out and said basically that he doesn't really view the trade request as a very serious thing other than just a negotiation tactic, and that he believes that Parsons will stay in Dallas long term. But it begs the question, what would Parsons garner on the market if he was dangled out to the other 31 teams? For reference, Parsons is just an elite edge rusher, pass rusher, one of only 2 players in NFL history to have 12 plus sacks in each of his first 4 seasons, alongside Reggie White, so in that upper echelon of pass rushers throughout NFL history. But what would he get in a deal? You know, you think at least 2 first-round picks. That was the main chunk that the Bears gave up to acquire Khalil Mack in a somewhat similar situation 5, 6, 7 years ago. And you would think that it would probably be somewhere around that level, multiple day 1 picks, and then at least 1 second round, third round pick somewhere in there, maybe a player if the Cowboys had a need, theoretically. But for teams that would make sense, it would have to be a team who feels that they're right there, and for whatever reason maybe has a window closing, or on the opening side of a window, young quarterback that you're not paying a lot of money to yet. So the ones that kind of jumped out to me were the Rams. You know, they haven't been stingy with their first round picks in years past, and they won a Super Bowl with Stafford, kind of on that theory of using up those picks to get players now. And with Stafford on the back end of his career, you got a bunch of young players like Jared Verse, who hasn't been paid yet. On the offensive side, Puka Nacua hasn't had that payday yet. So think about, they're probably going to be in the market for a rookie quarterback in the coming years. So kind of that bridge. You can spend some money now knowing that in the near future our quarterback position is probably going to get a lot cheaper. Obviously the Bears are a team that people are going to talk about in this situation just because they're missing that number 1 edge rusher, but I think that might be a little bit premature. They're still in the ramp-up period of the rebuild, and having those 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick, whatever the package might be, would still be ideal to have in your back pocket to help build around Caleb, hoping that he turns into the guy. So definitely a narrative league-wide that's going to carry over throughout the offseason into the regular season, as long as no progress is made in a contract. And then, like we said, if it's not a $41, $42, $43 million contract per year, he might end up actually getting traded, if not before the season, maybe at the deadline. It's kind of insane to think about a player of his caliber being a deadline trade, but crazier things have happened in the world of sports. So definitely a big story as we kind of turn to football season. Another big holdout story up in Buffalo, going down the list here. James Cook has officially turned his contract negotiation into a sit-out, hold-in. So he hasn't been practicing, kind of like Parsons, the past couple of days here. Cook set to play this season on the final year of his rookie contract, which will get about $5 million on the year. Super productive part of that Buffalo offense. 2,800 total yards and 24 touchdowns between the past 2 seasons combined. And then in the 3 postseason games last year for the Bills, had about 100 yards and a TD in each of those 3 games. So Josh Allen's the highlight name in that backfield. And they've done a pretty good job adding weapons at the tight end spot with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, but then also at the receivers, Amari Cooper, Khalil Shakir, and Cook is really the bell cow running back there next to Josh Allen. So probably another player that's going to end up being retained by his team despite the drama surrounding the contract situation, but a player that in the ever-evolving world of how much running backs are worth, it was kind of a topic of conversation that it didn't make sense for teams to pursue running backs heavily, and then all of a sudden Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry are picked up by the Eagles and Ravens respectively, and both those guys have 2,000 yards last year, and Saquon obviously a big part of the Super Bowl winning team, and you could argue that Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson are the most dangerous 1-2 punch out of the backfield in the NFL. So definitely value for a player like Cook. Just a list of teams here where he'd probably be the number 1 running back: Cowboys, Bears, Washington, Browns, Bengals, Steelers, Titans, Broncos. Only a handful of those guys are maybe in that looking to compete at the top of their conference and add another player to really go after it. But the Dallas part's interesting. Going back to the Parsons piece of it all, it's super unlikely. It'd be like Madden, turn your Xbox off kind of trade to think about Cook and a pick or 2 for Parsons. But could make sense for both teams in theory. Again, the chances of that happening are, far less than 1% if I had to prognosticate that. But could be an interesting piece just because Dallas is going with that running back position. Getting a player in the backfield for Jaden Daniels in Washington could be interesting. Getting another player for Bo Nix in the backfield there in Denver could be helpful. And then same with Cincinnati with Joe Burrow. They got Chase Brown taking over that lead running back role, but getting a more traditional 3-down back like Cook could help a lot of teams. But again, I think he'll probably stay in Buffalo. They have such a good thing going across that entire offense, and Cook's definitely a part of that. And I know their GM, Brandon Beane, was on local radio there recently and basically said, it's an unfortunate situation that Cook hasn't been practicing. He's kind of holding out here, but it's a situation that they hope to resolve. And it's not an idea that they don't see value in him or the running back position, but they just want to make sure that number works for both parties. And that kind of level-headed thinking, it's different than what we're seeing out of Dallas, but I think ultimately both those situations will end with that star player returning and giving it another couple years. So another situation to monitor, but again, probably ends up in Buffalo, especially if Josh Allen, the league MVP, has anything to say about it. Moving on down here to more training camp notes, quarterback battles in the news right now. Like I said at the top of the show, the Cleveland Browns signed former Ravens quarterback Tyler Snoop Huntley on Monday night. Adds the 5th quarterback into that room alongside Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders. Those latter 2 obviously draft picks this past April. Kenny Pickett they got in a trade, and then Joe Flacco signed the free agent, him returning to Cleveland after a little stint there with Kevin Stefanski and company a few years back. So Browns quarterback room just hit with the injury bug right now. Both Pickett and Gabriel dealing with hamstring problems to varying levels, and then Sanders has some arm soreness. Seems like he's already back at practice there and everything, but definitely a situation where they want to slow play it with the rookies and the younger guys and making sure that they're all healthy heading into actual live reps. So it makes sense to add a player like Huntley, who's seen a lot of game action, can come in as an extra training camp arm, play in their first preseason game or 2 if need be, but probably not a big threat to any 4 of those players for their roster spot down the line as we head into the regular season. The big question with that is just who wins what position battle. It's starter, but then who's number 2? Who do they keep as a 3? If anybody, do they keep a 4th quarterback? I would say Flacco. It'd be kind of surprising at this point if he isn't the number 1 quarterback, just because he's the veteran. There's no shame in starting with Flacco and then going to a younger person later in the season. But if you were to start with either Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, and then have to put Flacco in week 6, does that mean that we're benching one of these young guys for the long haul? So just from the cleanliness, kind of no drama standpoint, it makes a lot of sense for Flacco to be the week 1 starter. Pickett, I think all things considered, if healthy, will be the number 2. He was a really good backup in Philadelphia last year for that Super Bowl winning team. Took the victory formation kneel and everything, but was pretty good in limited action behind a good O-line and in a good situation. So a little different with Cleveland, but still a player that the Browns and those players know from his time in Pittsburgh. Somebody who has real NFL experience and somebody that you probably don't feel terrible about playing for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many games down the line there. And it really comes down to Dylan Gabriel versus Shedeur Sanders for that QB3 spot if they decide to have one. Traditional wisdom would tell you Gabriel is probably a little bit ahead just because they drafted him a little higher, and ownership and general managers and decision makers want to come off as right and have that resume builder of, see, we were right about this one. And the fact that they drafted him higher than Shedeur probably means that they would prioritize getting Gabriel more reps and experiences just so that they can say, hey, this was a top 100 pick on our third round, and we used it on a quarterback who ended up, if not being the starter, being a competitive number 2 quarterback that gives us a little bit of insurance down the line. So Shedeur, if he's a quarterback 4, does he stay around? Is he a practice squad player? Does he get traded somewhere? I don't know what happens there. It would be tough to imagine a world where they trade him, just considering every team passed on him so many times and there's so much drama about who he is already. But it's really interesting to follow that ESPN Cleveland. They're kind of doing training camp stats for all 4 of those guys, which is a little absurd, but good way to draw some engagement to the Browns kind of this offseason period. But again, prediction is probably Flacco 1, Pickett 2, Gabriel 3, and then Sanders is the real wild card of, do you keep him? Do you practice squad him? Do you waive him? I would say he probably ends up on the practice squad, but then you're at the risk of somebody else trying to come in and grab him, which if you're buying at that low, it very well could happen. So that's the one big quarterback battle, and we'll see Snoop Huntley in there taking reps in preseason games if need be, just because of injury. But that's the big quarterback battle with all those 4 guys. A smaller battle in terms of number of people, but kind of equally as important, is down in Indianapolis with the Colts. They released their first depth chart, and the quarterback was listed as Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones. So some pretty heavy implications there. Richardson, 4th overall pick a couple years back. Daniel Jones, a player they added in free agency. You would think that it would probably be Daniel Jones starting, just because if you start with Daniel Jones and end up having to put in Anthony Richardson, that's more of a vote of confidence in Richardson, that you still believe in him and that you're kind of re-handing the offense back over to him. If you start with Richardson and then have to pull him and go to Daniel Jones, that might be the final nail in the coffin of, we don't trust you and we don't think you can be the quarterback long term for us. So just from not painting yourself in a corner aspect, I think going with Daniel Jones makes more sense. But with Shane Steichen there, they're trying to run a particular type of offense, and it'll be interesting to see who kind of matches that more. Both Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones are, big, athletic, big arm quarterbacks, but different levels of experience, different combinations of how comfortable they are in the pocket versus on the roll. Richardson, probably that quarterback that you want to get out of the pocket a little more and looking for big deep shots, while Daniel Jones is probably that quarterback you're looking to play more like in the scheme and in the pocket. So kind of just seeing whichever style they perform more at this point. Like, and he's been around for a couple years and they haven't really had a lot of success, so he's kind of coaching for his job. So I would imagine Daniel Jones is probably the week 1 starter, and then if that doesn't work, they go to Anthony Richardson at some point. But Jones could definitely be one of those next Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield kind of guys who figures it out at a different spot down the road. And then a couple small spots that have lighter competitions. The Saints, between Tyler Shuck and Spencer Rattler, and Jake Hayner's in there somewhere, but really between those first 2, Shuck, I would imagine, probably wins that just because pick this year. Even though he doesn't have a lot of experience on the field between so many injuries during college, he is older and he does have the kind of experience of mental reps and seeing everything from a bunch of different angles. I bet Sheldon Moore probably wants to get rolling. First year down there, wants to get his guy kind of ingratiated into the offense there. So I would guess that would be Shuck. And then with the Giants, between Russell Wilson, Jackson Dart, and Jameis Winston, probably would start with Russell Wilson week 1. Again, another guy kind of like Steichen, where Daboll, their head coach, kind of coaching for his job. So if it looks grim with Russell Wilson, you always can fall back on putting in Jackson Dart and pitching the ownership. We went 6-11 or whatever they end up going this year, but there's a lot of bright things to look forward to in the future with Jackson Dart. Don't fire me. I'm the guy to kind of shepherd him along. So, and then having Jameis Winston just as like a quarterback 2, quarterback 3, depending on the circumstance. if the Giants are playing good and Wilson goes down with an injury, maybe Jameis hops in there. But if it's a thing where the offense is playing pretty poorly down the stretch, that's probably when you toss in Jackson Dart. So kind of those 4 quarterback situations: Cleveland, Indianapolis, New Orleans, and then the Giants in New York are kind of the only ones with open quarterback competitions. Heading down the list to Fox, De'Aaron Fox signed a 4-year, $229 million max contract extension with the Spurs. A big-time player they got recently in a trade with the Sacramento Kings just this past trade deadline. For his career, Fox is averaging 21.5 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds, and 1.8 stocks per game. So really high-level player, kind of an underrated player. Over the last 5 seasons, a little over 8,000 points, is the 12th most in the NBA. And over that span, Fox has more points than LeBron James, Pascal Siakam, Jaylen Brown, Kevin Durant, Zach LaVine, Joel Embiid, Damian Lillard, Jalen Brunson. So a bunch of players that maybe have had injuries kind of on the downfall of their career, but still a bunch of really big-time names that he's ahead of in that scoring total. The weird thing with the Spurs and Fox is just that point guard depth is kind of a little convoluted. They drafted Stephon Castle 4th overall in 2024, and he won the Rookie of the Year. And then they just drafted Dylan Harper 2nd overall this past season. So 2 guards, not even 20 yet. 6'6", that 210, 215 range. So definitely some shooting guard versatility too. Both guys that are kind of more naturally point guards. Dylan Harper, Ron Harper's son, and Ron Harper was another kind of traditional point guard first. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all shakes out. And just because of those 2 being on the roster and being younger investments that the team has made, you have to wonder, is Fox's contract a tradable asset at some point? And the answer is yes. Every NBA contract is tradable. Just look at Luka Doncic. The only question would be, who would it be a player that you can target with that? I always thought Giannis made a lot of sense for the Spurs, especially when Popovich had his thumbprint on that team. He seemed like such a classic Greg Popovich power forward center. That's not the same with Popovich retiring here recently. But Fox's contract is definitely tradable. It's a little tough when you talk about trading offensive initiators, point guards, ball handling, small forwards, whoever really runs that offense. It's hard to trade a De'Aaron Fox to a team like the Knicks who have Jalen Brunson or the Lakers who have Luka. It'd be a redundant thing to get him to a team that already has an established point guard like that. So not really anybody that makes a lot of sense right now. The one that you could say that doesn't really have that player would be like the Bulls, but they're not really in the market to be buying contracts in the next 1, 2, 3 years, more than likely. It could be a deal where the Mavericks, if Kyrie doesn't really heal all the way and they're looking for a new point guard, but then you're hoping that the Spurs are able to play salary dump game, and with Wembanyama going to be in his prime in the next few years and both those young guards molding into their own, that probably doesn't make sense. So a big wait and see with what happens with this contract. I think he'll be the starting point guard for this year and probably the next year, but you have 2 really highly drafted, highly talented point guards waiting for their turn. And Fox is, a really, really good player, but a somewhat one-dimensional player in that he's good on defense, but not a defensive all-star. Really good offensive player, but not really the best offensive player you could ask for in that point guard position. So he could definitely end up being a movable asset just to get another kind of small forward, power forward, shooting guard option around Wembanyama. They're going to have to pay him at some point coming up here pretty soon. But yeah, definitely a player who, is worthy of the max contract that he just got. But one that wouldn't be so super surprising if he wasn't a Spur within the next 2-3 years. And then down to our last sports topic here, we got our first preseason coach poll for the college football, released on Monday. Going through the top 10 here, we got number 1 Texas, 2 Ohio State, 3 Penn State, 4 Georgia, 5 Notre Dame, 6 Clemson, 7 Oregon, 8 Alabama, 9 LSU, 10 Miami. So looking at the entire top 25, 9 different SEC teams, 6 different Big Ten teams, 5 different Big 12 teams, and 3 different ACC teams. So definitely carryover conversation from last year of, is the SEC or the Big Ten the better conference top to bottom? As of right now, football hasn't been played yet, obviously, but the SEC has more teams in the top 25 there. But the Big 12 also not far behind there with 5 teams themselves. So getting a good look at what the coaches expect to happen. The headline is Texas jumping into that number 1 spot with Arch Manning taking over at quarterback. A lot of hype there because of that last name, obviously, and his abilities throughout high school. We haven't seen him a whole lot in college yet, but it seems like the consensus around the national landscape is that he's going to really take over and be that, number one college quarterback type of player, potential Heisman candidate, etc. Ohio State at the 2 spot, very natural for them. They've been really competitive over the past couple of years here, obviously winning it last year. Penn State in there, another team who's been super competitive, just hasn't really been able to get over that Ohio State bump yet. Georgia, they've won a couple recently. Notre Dame, Clemson, Oregon, all teams who have, made really deep playoff runs. Notre Dame last year being the runner-up, but just waiting to get over that hump. And then Bama and their new coaching regime, and then LSU and Miami, all three of those kind of like a lot of talent, a lot of expectations, but can they jump into that next level? So the good thing is that we're going to see a lot of these teams face top-end talent right away. First weekend, we got number 1 Texas at number 2 Ohio State. So obviously these rankings are going to change, even if it's just Ohio State beating Texas and they jump to 1 and Texas goes to 2. Like, that'd be a minor change, but still a change. And then number 9 LSU at number 6 Clemson, and then the following day, August 31st, number 5 Notre Dame at number 10 Miami. So big weekend for that first weekend of college football where every team's playing 3 top 10 matchups. That's super exciting. So everything's going to change right away in the year with those 3 games, and you'll see teams coming up and down. It's hard to put a lot of weight into preseason rankings just because this is all what coaches around the country think are going to happen based on recruiting and who played last year and transfer portal and a bunch of things that maybe ultimately don't matter for the 2025-2026 college football season, but a good way to kind of measure expectations for a viewer or somebody in media versus what a coach might think. So like I said, that first weekend with those 3 games will be very crucial maybe to the entire narrative of the year-long college football season. And then moving down here away from sports into our media segment here, we're going to review Fantastic Four. Saw it last week in theaters. I thought just a super fun comic book movie. For anybody who hasn't seen it or seen the advertising, there's a clear 60s nostalgic throwback vibe that I think really works in the movie. Very strong ensemble cast between Pedro Pascal and Vanessa Kirby and Yvonne Moss-Bacharach and Joel Quinn as Fantastic Four. They all play those neat characters in that group really well and bring a different spin to it as opposed to iterations of these movies past. I thought the interesting thing, kind of going back to the cast, is the gender switch made to the Silver Surfer character. So traditionally a man, but this time they made a woman, Shala Ball. And I thought it worked really well. There's a little bit of like a love connection narrative between her and Johnny Storm, but definitely a fun way to change it up. I know that's always a narrative in recent years of, do these make movies better or not? I thought it was a pretty seamless example of how you can switch a character's gender from their traditional source media and make it work. The thing that I liked the most, I know Marvel for a long time was kind of stuck in that trope where the good guy would fight the bad guy at the end of the movie, and the bad guy would just be kind of like the good guy with the same power or superpowers or skills, but would have more evil intentions, and the good guy would kind of win based on like the power of goodness or the power of friendship. And obviously that'd be hard to do in a Fantastic Four situation because there's 4 of them, and it would have to be a nearly identical adversary to go against, but they definitely avoid that. They're fighting Silver Surfer, but then also Galactus, who's a giant threat to them, and the ending is more creative than the classic Marvel thing to just have a character win because they have a better heart than the bad guy. So I thought super fun, super creative movie. The first Marvel movie I'd seen in theaters, I was trying to think, since at least the animated Spider-Man movies, which I know aren't really Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, but I really liked this one. I thought it was a good way to introduce characters that we already know. They didn't really do too much more of an origin story than just a montage between how the characters got their powers and just a few fights that they were in before we check in on them, just to show their rise to fame. Similar to like the Batman that they did in recent years, similar to Tom Holland's Spider-Man, just skip that whole step of like, we know how they got their powers, these characters, let's just get right into them being superheroes. So that was really cool. Definitely excited to see where they are in the future. I'm not super plugged into the future timeline of Marvel and the different multiverses and timelines and yada yada yada. And this movie did a good job of not diving too far into that. There's a post-credit scene that kind of dips into that. I don't want to say too much about that, but it was really good. I'm going to give it a 9.2 rating. Probably the best movie or show that I've seen on the kind of movies and shows we've done here. Again, probably the best Marvel movie I've seen. I don't want to say since Endgame, because there were a couple good ones in there. I haven't seen them all. I haven't seen Thunderbolts, which I know is really good. And I haven't seen the newest Captain America, which I heard kind of mixed reviews on, but I'm not going to say I haven't liked anything they've done since like the Infinity War Endgame. I really like Moon Knight. I really like the Loki stuff they've done on the TV side. So maybe the best movie I've seen over that time. But yeah, really liked it. Ready for them to come back, and I think the Avengers Doomsday, they were saying, is the next like big multi-franchise kind of mushed together. So I'm sure it's going to be a couple of years, but excited to see them back just because I really liked all those characters and I really liked them all together. And it'll be interesting to see them kind of plucked out of the 60s maybe and interact with people in today's day and age. A lot of praise for that movie. Really liked it more than I thought I would even. But that's it for today. I talked about it last time, and as you can see, finishing up a move here, so my setup's a little messed up. Hopefully by Friday when I record again, it'll be a little cleaner. Maybe get away from my kitchen here or from the air mattress that I have up here, and maybe bring the camera down so I don't have to like stand up out of it. But that's it for today. Another episode Friday. Thanks so much, and see you guys later.